We knew the renewal had happened because they briefed it to People magazine in America. Initially, there was this view, certainly taken by the Beckhams, that hang on, they're being quite classy here. They're not going to release any pictures. They're not going to actually like rub anyone's noses in it. They've renewed their wedding vows, and that's it.
The photos of the vow renewal land.
We just see this like barrage of photos on their Instagrams.
But I mean, the Beckhams aren't there.
It was like, whoa, nobody expected this. In fact, the Beckhams described it themselves as an onslaught.
Because Brooklyn has basically just, in so many words, said, "You are no longer a part of my marriage or my life."
David and Victoria were furious in May when Brooklyn did not wish his grandfather, Tony, a happy birthday. That's Victoria's father. We then had the same conversations about Sandra Beckham, David's mum, because again, you know, she's another member of the family that's done nothing wrong here, very, you know, innocent party. So they were, of course, like anxious that the same was going to happen. But no, Brooklyn, you know, he came out the stocks and he wished his grandmother a happy birthday. Again, you know, nice for Sandra, relief for Sandra, you know, relief for everybody around. But actually, again, it's like, guys, you've not got the best reputation at the moment. So, you know, and that was very much what the Beckham view of it was.
After David's 50th birthday celebrations, where Brooklyn didn't attend any of them, we started to see the feud shift focus away from David and Victoria and on to Brooklyn's younger brothers, 20-year-old Cruz and 22-year-old Romeo.
What they're trying to do, what Nicola and Brooklyn are trying to do is put out there that Brooklyn had a really unhappy childhood. You know, there's no detail, there's nothing, you know, it's like, no, actually, it's your fault. You know, they're now kind of, you know, firing shots at David and Victoria for being bad parents. You know, obviously I wasn't there. No one was there apart from them. But I mean, anyone who knows the Beckhams, and of course they've got their faults, they know they've got their faults. But the one thing everybody says about them is that they are great parents. And so, you know, what did they do? You know, who knows?
In May, whispers began that there was a feud directly between Cruz, 20-year-old Cruz, and Brooklyn. So Cruz had been apparently calling up all of the family's usual restaurants and asking whether Brooklyn was going to be there on the night that he was intending to attend an event. And so he would call and say, is Brooklyn going to be there? And would also ask the staff to let him know if his older brother was going to be in attendance and therefore he wouldn't go. And this is the first time we've sort of started to see a direct argument between the two brothers. It was also revealed in May that there had been a long-standing bubbling argument going on between Romeo and Brooklyn. They'd been incredibly close when they were children. But then when it came to the big D-Day, the wedding between Nicola Peltz and Brooklyn, Nicola had refused to speak to Romeo's then girlfriend, Mia Regan, who was also a model and was incredibly beautiful. And, you know, Nicola felt quite threatened by her presence being there.
When Brooklyn and Nicola, a few years ago, bought a house in LA, apparently, Nicola's family were very cross about the Beckhams not contributing to this house. And actually, the Beckhams were like, we've brought our children up to work for what they have. You know, Brooklyn had a job in a French cafe in Kensington Square, just off Kensington Square, when he was 14. He would be in there a few hours on a Saturday morning. You know, Nicola, it's very different. Nicola had money chucked at her. Nelson wanted an easy life. So although the Beckhams are extremely rich, and of course, you know, were David and Victoria's children spoiled? Like probably, like compared to most children. But they have, amongst all of the nonsense, really done their very best to instill a work ethic. And that work ethic seems to have kind of changed for Brooklyn since he's been with Nicola. And of course, you know, those who know the Beckhams do very much blame Nicola for that.
So you've got this ongoing feud with Romeo and Brooklyn, which had just come to the surface in May, as the Mail revealed. And then you've sort of got signs of Cruz, who'd remained quite quiet throughout the whole thing, starting to show his discomfort with his brother. Cruz, who's a budding musician, shared his new song on Instagram, and everyone piled in the comment section, as they like to do to the Beckham children, calling him a nepo baby, etc., which Cruz ignored. But there was one particular comment which he picked up on, and that was when someone said, "Are you going to stick with this job? Or are you going to become a race car driver next or something?" Cruz then deflects the criticism onto his brother, Brooklyn, and says, "Wrong brother, mate." So now you've got this sort of catfight between the brothers coming to the surface within the social media comments.
They've now blocked Brooklyn, the pair of them, according to Brooklyn's publicists. And the only one really that he hasn't had a fallout with is little Harper. I think it's important to differentiate between Romeo and Cruz here with the fallout with Brooklyn, because Romeo and Brooklyn fell out some time ago over Romeo's ex-girlfriend, Kim Turnbull, who he's no longer with. Cruz and Brooklyn were really close, and they'd never had a crossword. And they were, in fact, David and Victoria were furious when Nicola and Brooklyn came back to do their Moncler advert and didn't tell the family, because Cruz had never done anything to upset Brooklyn. Romeo and Brooklyn are different. They've been at war for quite some time.
Team Beckham were quite adamant as well that the feud with Brooklyn had nothing to do with it. But actually what had been happening was Kim had been used as a scapegoat by Nicola's team, blaming her for the reason why Brooklyn didn't actually attend any of David's birthday events. But actually, the rumours of a relationship between Kim Turnbull and Brooklyn had been completely exaggerated. So Kim was forced to speak out, and she shared a statement which said, "I've avoided speaking on this topic to prevent adding fuel to the fire. However, it's come to a point where I feel the need to address it so I can move on. I will not continue to receive harassment or be embarrassed on the basis of lies to fit a certain narrative. I have never been romantically involved in any capacity at any point with the person in question," meaning Brooklyn. "Nothing between us has occurred further than a school friendship at the age of 16. I would like to remove myself from the ongoing conversation and set the record straight for the sake of everyone involved."
Brooklyn does no longer speak to his friends pre-Nicola. So you've got Jack Ramsey, Gordon Ramsay's son, and they were like best friends. They were like little boys who would play in the garden together. They were real mates. He wasn't there. In fact, he doesn't speak to Jack. Then, you've got Rocco Ritchie wasn't there. So no, there is nobody in Brooklyn's life anymore who was there before her. So instead you have all of these, you have a makeup artist, a content creator, you have, it was kind of like a lineup of staff, like the paid help were the guests. And so that also prompted a real sadness for the Beckhams. Who were like, he doesn't even see his friends anymore. And like, what is going on here?
So July comes around and the third sibling takes centre stage, that being Harper 7. It was her 14th birthday coming up, and if Brooklyn was going to ignore that, that would be the final straw for the Beckhams, particularly for Romeo and Cruz, who are incredibly, incredibly protective over her. So the big day rolls around, and Brooklyn does indeed wish her a happy birthday, but it's incredibly pointed and obviously very crafted. So what you have here is a simple picture of Brooklyn, Harper, and he's made sure to get Nicola in the picture as well, so that there's no question towards his alliances in this whole scenario. And it's actually a picture taken from the last known picture, actually, of Brooklyn and his younger sister, who he was incredibly close with, at Victoria Beckham's fashion show in September.
Brooklyn was like, not just a big brother to Harper, but like almost like a kind of little dad figure, because he was 14 when she was born, 12, 13 when she was born, and David was playing football away a lot. So he was kind of this male figure much older male figure in her life, and she adored him, as did Nicola, or at least she pretended to. So Nicola would, pose up with Harper like she was her big sister, and she was a big sister that Harper never had. Obviously, Harper hasn't got any big sisters. So they made a real big deal about her. So it was like, oh, now they're in a bit of a quandary. Do they post or do they not? As the day grew nearer, it was like, oh my God. And David and Victoria were worried because, of course, they've got Harper's feelings to think about here. And, she's obviously really upset that she doesn't see her biggest brother anymore.
It's not really, as we've discussed here, it's not an olive branch at all to his younger sister. It is a clear PR stunt.
I think they had to do it, right? Like, they had been really under attack. Their publicity was really not in a good place. And had they ignored little Harper's birthday party, it would have just been an easy hit for people to think that they were, pretty unkind. So, that it was being briefed out by the Brooklyn and Nicola's PR machine that, they're wishing her a happy birthday. But of course, to David and Victoria, it was like, well, you've done this as a publicity stunt. You've done it because you know that your PR is not in a great place. So let's wish your little sister happy birthday.
Also, another outcome of the Harper birthday post is that Cruz and Romeo, Nicola and Brooklyn completely sever ties on social media, which for Gen Z is, that can be a battlefield and it can say a million words. Cruz and Romeo say that Nicola and Brooklyn unfollowed them on social media, but what Team Brooklyn is saying is that Cruz and Romeo actually blocked them. Whatever happened, neither of them are seeing each other's social media content, which might be for the best because they do keep sort of hitting out at each other on Instagram.
Does anybody in the Beckham camp actually really understand why they've fallen out with Brooklyn?
I think Victoria knows. I think Victoria definitely knows. So Brooklyn and Nicola got together in October 2019, and by the beginning of 2020, it was lockdown. So Brooklyn moved to America. He spent lockdown with Nicola. And at that point, that's when things really changed between them. So it goes right back to the beginning of their relationship. And then of course you had the wedding and the run up to the wedding. It wasn't just the dress, the run up to the Peltz family took over completely. And I guess she's the bride. Nicola was the bride, that they were her family. Brooklyn's parents, the Beckhams, were the groom's family, right? So you can kind of understand that. But then I think they're and actually in the outset, David and Victoria went out to stay with the Peltzes in Florida, and they all apparently got on rather well. But then I guess things just deteriorated. I think Nicola, look, these people as well, don't forget, they don't have jobs, do they? They don't have 9 to 5 jobs. So they've got an awful lot of time to kind of, meddle maybe, or get het up about something that most people would just go, oh, whatever. So they've got a lot of time on their hands.
So over the summer, both families, the Peltzes and the Beckhams, have been having a lovely time. They've both been on their mega yachts, sailing around Europe. We've seen posts from Nicola saying how much she loves Brooklyn and her family, and very lovey-dovey, despite the fact that her husband, Brooklyn, has seriously fallen out with his side of the family. And it's all very much sort of, we're a unit, we're sailing around on our massive yacht, yada yada.
You can't help but think that Brooklyn is just being used as this pawn by Nicola to say, hey, look, now he's got my family. You don't need your own family, Brooklyn, you've got my family. And it's all being used as a real, let's rub their noses in it. So I don't actually think they're all that close. Brooklyn's all that close. And he must just be quite lonely, I would have thought at times. He's out there on his own with this massive, massive family that have got loads of money and live very differently to how he lived with his own parents.
And then you've got the Beckhams, who have also seemed to be having a lovely time, having their own fun. Cruz has been seen wearing his dad's, not the dad's actual wife fronts, but David's sort of Speedos. It's all been lighthearted, but very much separate. And then what happens is in August, the photos of the vow renewal land?
We knew the renewal had happened because they briefed it to People magazine in America. They being Brooklyn and Nicola and their PR team. So initially there was this view, certainly taken by the Beckhams, that hang on, they're being quite classy here. They're not going to release any pictures. They're not going to actually like rub anyone's noses in it. They've slipped it out that they've renewed their wedding vows, and that's it. And then 9 days later, in fact, we just see this like barrage of photos on their Instagrams. And I think it was like, whoa, nobody expected this. In fact, the Beckhams described it themselves as an onslaught. It was just an onslaught of pictures. And it was like, here we are doing this. Here are our friends. Here are Nicola's mum and dad. Here are Nicola's siblings. But of course, there were no David and Victoria or any of Brooklyn's siblings.
The fact that Brooklyn and Nicola had, on the 2nd of August, renewed their vows completely, with Nicola's 86-year-old dad, Nelson, being the officiator of the whole thing. These pictures come out and they're very glamorous. They're of Nicola in her mum's repurposed wedding dress, Brooklyn looking very happy. It's all very, very romantic.
Yeah, so we had Nelson officiating, which again, like, I don't know. I mean, I know it's not an official wedding ceremony, but, you know, Nelson Peltz is a billionaire businessman. I can't imagine he's ever taken a role like that before. And again, that was one of the pictures that was released. You know, they're not stupid. They probably spent the 9 days deciding what pictures they were going to put out to the world. And they decide to put that one, which is really like a dagger to the heart, if you like. It all sounds very tabloidese, but it must have been so hard. Well, it was heartbreaking. And actually, then you've got Nicola and her mum and the topless shot where they're kind of posing up while she's getting changed into her evening gown. And then you've got the whole Peltz family lined up together.
But, I mean, the Beckhams aren't there. And that is a complete... I don't even know how to describe the gravity of how horrible that must be for David and Victoria, because Brooklyn has basically just, in so many words, said, you are no longer a part of my marriage or my life.
When I saw those pictures of Nelson officiating, obviously, like, David would probably rather die than do something like that. But it did dawn on me, like, they were so close. Brooklyn and David did so much together. They go to the gym together. They go for runs together. They go for a milkshake together. They were so close. And to no longer have that in his life, but have this 80-something-year-old man who's, you know, just sort of throws money at problems. You know, it really does sadden me.
So what happens is that Nicola on Instagram, I think she did a total of 48 Instagram pictures of this whole party, them partying together. It's very much a full circle moment going back to the start of the feud, which began back in 2022 with Brooklyn and Nicola's initial wedding at her dad's Palm Springs mansion.
There was a huge fallout at the wedding in 2022 about what dress Nicola was going to wear. And she ended up wearing Valentino. And, did that put Victoria's nose out of joint? Victoria says she didn't have time to make it, you know, but it was the centre of one of the parts of this feud. And so it was just like, oh, here I am in this dress. And it was, again, you know, so there to rub Victoria's nose in it. I mean, I think at the centre of this feud, the real hatred is between Nicola and Victoria. I think that's where the real nub of it is. And so Nicola is just pushing all the buttons.
Victoria is a fashion designer. She is shunning her mother-in-law's dress. She's basically saying, I don't want to wear what you have made. And then since then, we've seen this sort of overall arc of the feud, and it's just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And you can say that what happened a couple of weeks ago in August when they renewed the vows is sort of that final nail in the coffin. We're going back to where it all began. We're having a different wedding now. You're not even involved in this.
Yeah, so David and Victoria, I think, have very much now accepted it. They knew as soon as Brooklyn and Nicola flew back to America after they didn't go to David's 50th birthday parties that they were never going to see them, for a very long time. And they knew at that point that Brooklyn didn't want anything to do with his family. But where they're really, the pain this time came from the fact that he didn't invite his grandparents. And so Jackie Adams and Sandra Beckham were like second mums to him growing up. Brooklyn lived with them a lot while Victoria was still in the Spice Girls. David was playing football. They brought him up when he was very little. And, they adore him. And they thought that he adored them. And then all of a sudden, they've got this big wedding that the world is now watching on social media. And they weren't there.
Brooklyn is basically saying goodbye to his family in so many ways.
David and Victoria would get on a plane now and go and get him. Like they believe that he's being brainwashed by Nicola. He's being referred to, amongst the clan, the Beckham clan, as the hostage, because they think that she is holding him hostage and that, she is controlling him to the point where he can no longer make his own decisions. And this isn't the Brooklyn they know. The Brooklyn they know is the Brooklyn that adored his grandmothers and who loved his little sister, who loved his little brothers, who loved his mum and dad and loved being part of this big family. He loved his cousins, he loved his auntie, he loved his aunties, he loved his... And so, and all of a sudden that he doesn't anymore. Like that's what they just cannot get their head around. And the only answer they can come to is that it's Nicola.